Hi, I'm Brian Crombie, and we're going to be talking on The Brian Crombie Show. We're going to be talking about politics, arts, business, and social issues on The Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV. Welcome to the Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV. I want to introduce you to someone who's going to tell us quite the story of dealing with children with autism and the challenges of that, the challenges with government, and a lot of personal issues associated with the story. Vanessa Shelley is a real estate agent broker in the East End of Toronto, and she has a child with autism. Vanessa, welcome to our show.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. So your son is how old?
He will be 11 in March.
And tell us about the diagnosis. When did it happen? How'd you find out about it? What the impact was, etc.
Absolutely. So around 15 months old, I started to notice some signs of just him being different. He had language up until that point and started to lose it. Eye contact started to go. So we would look him in the eye and he would look up and down at his hands, but not in your eyes. And we started to see some worrisome signs. And so we thought, having known also a couple families who had severely autistic children, that it might be something we needed to look into. And so we did. We went to a developmental pediatrician. We were on the wait list for about 6 months. So he was just over 2 when we got him diagnosed. It's about a 2-hour test that they do for that process. And we did come out with the diagnosis of autism, level 3, which is the moderate to severe side of autism.
So there are different levels of autism?
There is. And so the way that they have classified it now, so level 1 autism typically is people who, they have trouble in social situations. It's a very mild form of autism, something similar like you would see on shows like The Good Doctor or Sheldon Cooper on The Big Bang Theory is a perfect example of sort of what a level 1 autism would be. Level 2 obviously is more severe than that. They typically have a bit more language issues, functionality issues. And then level 3, where my son is, they're in a very regressed state a lot of times. So my son, even though he is almost 11, still very much so has the capacity to function of that of about a 2-year-old, 2 to 3-year-old.
Really? Seriously? I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yes. So that's sort of where the classifications come in. Now, since his diagnosis of autism, he's also been diagnosed with an intellectual disability, which actually puts him on a dual diagnosis scale. For mental retardation as well, or for retardation as well. So meaning that this is a lifelong disability that he won't just grow out of.
How have you dealt with this?
It's been a challenge, definitely. In the early stages, I thought, like I think a lot of parents, when they get a child diagnosed with something, anything, physical illness or developmental or otherwise, I'm going to be the one to pull them out of it or find the cure or fix it. I spent hours researching everything I could on autism. I got him into every program, support system that I could to try to help him, right from the get-go to sort of either, cure it in the early stages or then just manage it and help it. I tried different diets, gluten-free diets, and, avoiding red food dye and all the different things that, you sort of read. And everybody seems to have, have you tried this for autism? Or I saw a thing on TV and, a boy with autism was cured because he did this. And, so we did try a lot of those things, just like any parent, in sort of desperation and hope that, you can help your child. And then in the later years, rather, when, we sort of realized, this is not something he's going to grow out of. It became more about acceptance and finding ways to help him progress and, help him deal with what he has to deal with and navigate the world in a way that made sense to him rather than trying to force him to see the world the way we wanted him to see. And so that really was a big shift in how dealing with him became sort of an optimistic thing.
I understand it had, very negative impacts on your marriage.
It did. I mean, it's very difficult. The emotions of finding out, he was our only child. So, finding out that your only child, and especially as, a son, the one that's kind of carrying on the bloodline, is going to be in this situation. It's very difficult. We had also thought of adopting. At one point, we were going to adopt a child through Children's Aid. And once we realized how severe my son's aggressions became, we didn't feel it was right to bring another child into the home. And we knew sort of how much we were going to be taking on with his autism. And so we decided not to go forward with that adoption process. All of those factors, I think, play into, stress on a marriage. And yeah, in 2020, we decided to part ways. We're still great co-parents and get along wonderfully. But just, it was easier to be separated and to deal with this on our own.
I'm sorry that impacted you so negatively. How is your son today?
So this year has been a journey for him. When we spoke previously, back in November of 2 years ago, almost now, he had started to get into some aggressive behavior. Again, this is very common with autism, that they have a hard time regulating their aggression center of their brain. And because he's mostly nonverbal, he does have some words. It's very difficult for him to, he has emotions and feelings just like any other 11-year-old boy would have, but because he can't express them and tell us, it sometimes comes out negatively in aggression and things like self-injuring behavior. And that was sort of what we were battling for the last year, was him very aggressively headbanging his head against walls, through windows, off countertops. It was a really horrifying thing to watch as a parent, but also to see that your child, that self-preservation that we all have to, to avoid pain and to avoid hurting ourselves, that something inside him was tormenting him so much to cause him to physically be harming himself. It was one of the worst things that we've ever encountered, to the point where he ended up having to go to sick kids in April, to the psych ward for a week there to try to get those behaviors under control. And then again, in July until August, he was there for 7 weeks at Michael Guerin's child and adolescent mental health unit for 7 weeks, for them to ultimately try to get that under control again. So it's been a really difficult journey this year with him. Once he went through those 2 sort of stints in the psych wards, it was recommended to us as parents, just because he is getting so big and strong. And he is, very difficult to manage and needs so much support all the time. He is now in a residential care home that it has 24-hour support, and he gets one-on-one support 24 hours a day.
That must be tough on you not seeing him.
It's immensely difficult. The nice thing is the home is only 15 minutes from my home, and we do have sign-out privileges and visiting privileges anytime we want. So he does still come home on weekends, and we do go visit him during the week there as well. But it was immensely difficult to know that, myself as a parent, and I know his father felt the same way, that, we felt almost like we'd failed as parents, not being able to keep him in the home, and not for lack of trying other. We had one-on-one supports coming into the home to help us, and they would all quit because his violence was getting so bad. In fact, one of them, as he left the house one day when he was quitting, said, your son's going to kill you one day, and then left the house. So it had gotten to a really critical point. It was a last resort. We knew eventually he would probably have to have some sort of residential care in his later years, 16, 17. He's going to be a very big boy. He's already 5'2" and about 80 pounds at 11. Probably going to be about 6'4" if the family lines are any indication. And so we knew that that was a step that would probably happen, in the later years, but definitely not this early. And so it was really a struggle to deal with at first.
My gosh, what you and your husband, your former husband, and your son have all gone through.
It's definitely been something I would have never guessed we would have to deal with. If you had asked me what my worst fear for autism would have been when he was diagnosed, it would be, that as an adult, I would worry about him as an adult and sort of what the future held for him then. Definitely not, as a prepubescent boy, seeing the behaviors and seeing the trauma. And unfortunately, his hospital visits were very traumatic for him as well. And this is one of sort of the reasons why I kind of wanted to bring this all to light, because hospitals are wonderful. Even Sick Kids Hospital is wonderful for children. However, children with autism and, intellectual disabilities, they really don't have a lot of understanding. And so even the way that he was dealt with, going in and out of hospitals was fairly traumatic for him. He was strapped to a bed. He was given ketamine shots because he was getting so, aggressive and violent, trying to smash his head. And they really didn't know how to deal with it. And so, a lot of time, 2 or 3 times in Sick Kids alone, he was given, heavy sedatives and just strapped to a bed, for an hour or so, to knock him out and just try to, placate him until they could figure out what to do with him. That still presents trauma to him today. He'll play with toys and strap them to the beds and say, okay, seatbelts. So, it's something that I want to work with hospitals more, and finding ways to deal with autism so that, we are supporting them in a world that they live in safely, but not traumatizing the way that my son went through.
Well, you wanted to talk to me and talk to our listeners about what you've learned and sort of lessons that you've gathered and suggestions you've got for government and healthcare. We want to hear you. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Vanessa Shelley. And hopefully, Vanessa, you'll share with us some of your suggestions of your experience. Stay with us, everybody. Hi, I'm Brian Crombie, and we're going to be talking on the Brian Crombie Show. We're going to be talking about politics, arts, business, and social issues on the Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV. Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV. We're chatting tonight about autism with Vanessa Shelley, who's got an autistic son. Sounds like really an experience I just can't imagine, Vanessa. He's 11 years old, you said. He's in a residential home right now. He used to live with you. He had a couple of episodes where you had to take him to psychiatric wards in hospitals. You've described how he was strapped down and given sedatives. I think in our prior conversation, you also talked about some of the challenges you had in getting help for him in different facilities in your home community, et cetera. Tell me what you've learned about the whole process, about what government does well, what government doesn't do well, what the healthcare system needs to do. What suggestions have you got for other parents that may have autistic children?
So starting with the healthcare portion, I think that hospitals especially need to take more of a look at, not only children, but I hear it time and time again too from, I'm in an autism community with other parents and I speak to, families all the time who have adult autistic children. And when they go into hospitals, it's the same thing, that the healthcare community really has a hard time understanding sort of the needs of this group of people and how to deal with them. Sensory alone, the bright lights of a hospital, the noises, they're very, very sensory sensitive. And so things like that can cause aggressions and triggers, simply by having those elements that, for you and I going into a hospital would not affect us at all. So I think, and it's one of the things that, I'd like to work with hospitals and have other, advocates for autism work with hospitals to really help them understand, when these patients come in, how to deal with them properly so that they're not, making these behaviors also come out and causing more agitation, which can, lead to things like them being strapped to a bed and sedated, which is not necessary. I understand for safety when it is, but there can be a lot done in the hospitals to sort of prevent these behaviors from escalating to the level that they do to necessitate that. So that would be the first step that I would suggest. On a government level, I think that, and I actually just did a delegation this summer to the town of Ajax, hoping to get it to provincial and federal level. There are so many that are on a wait list 15 years to get into these residential care homes, especially for, the ones that are approaching adulthood. A lot of times they end up injuring themselves very greatly or injuring or sometimes even killing their caregivers because their needs are so great and their aggression gets so great that the people that are caring for them at home simply can't do it. And they really do need to be in a proper place that can care for them, accordingly. But the wait list for government funded ones are 15 years right now.
15 years?
It's 15 years for government funded facilities. Now, the alternative to that is where my son is right now, which is a private care facility, but that comes at a cost of $560 a day. And so for the majority of people, that is absolutely unaffordable. But those are the only two options right now to get any sort of support care home, is 15-year waits or $560 a day.
That's unbelievable. $560 a day or wait 15 years.
Yeah. And so that's really where I feel, the government, and this is one of the reasons I did that delegation, can really step up and help. They're doing a lot for the here and now of autism, which I commend the government. Their OAP program, the funding for services like ABA, which is sort of, seen in the autism world as sort of the gold standard of therapy and treatment for autism. However, there's not a lot of services for people who are approaching adulthood. And like I said, when they do need that care and those programs and services aren't there, waiting 15 years I think is simply unacceptable. And so,
Vanessa, I'm shocked at this. And obviously you and your husband have got the financial wherewithal to afford this, I guess. But like, if you didn't have the financial wherewithal, where would your son be today?
So I would love to say that I have, oodles and boodles of money to pay for this. My son does, because he is native status, there is a program called Jordan's Principle through the government that temporarily is funding him for this program. Because he has dual diagnosis of autism and intellectual disability, he does qualify for something called complex special needs funding. And that is for, a core group of people who simply could not care for themselves at any point in their lives and going forward, that the government will fund. Now, typically, we did this very backwards. So typically what would happen is you'd have to apply for this special funding. You have to go before, I think, several committees to approve it. Once you're approved for the funding, then you can start looking for care homes. Now, looking for care homes, even private ones, to find space in them is almost impossible. I very, very strongly advocated, because the hospital did not want my son coming home after his, it was about 5 weeks in, and they said, listen, he's too dangerous to come home. We really believe strongly he needs to be in a care home that specifically deals with autism. We want, to facilitate that. And so we actually had to have Children's Aid come in to help facilitate that, because it has to be a third party that starts that process. It can't be the parents that starts that process. And they came in and they couldn't find a care home for him. And so my son sat in limbo basically for 2 extra weeks in the hospital, simply because no one would take him and he couldn't come home with us. And I, sitting there feeling helpless, not being able to find a spot for your son to go, and somewhere, and that's one of the things too. It wasn't just the first spot that came available we were willing to take. If I'm trusting somebody to help look after my son, I need to make sure it's the right place as well. And so I took it to social media, and I put it out on social media, sort of explaining the situation of, listen, this is what's happening. He's sitting here in the hospital week after week. He's not able to come home, and he's being told there's not enough space in any of these care homes, even the private ones. And it worked. A nurse from one of the care homes saw it and reached out to me. I had also sent, some emails to each of these care homes myself, kind of pleading my case on my own behalf. And fortunately, one of the best ones that we were fortunate enough to get did see it. They did come and visit the hospital, and within about 3 or 4 days of visiting, agreed to take him. And so they actually created more space in a wonderful home. He's in a home now with 5 other severely autistic boys. He's starting to make friends with them, and we're really seeing him blossom now, being so supported in an element that works for him.
Well, that's, I guess a great turn to the story. And so thank you for sharing that with us. And I hope he continues to blossom. Let's talk about you for a second. Mm-hmm. You're a real estate agent, broker. It would appear to me from social media, at least, that you've got a very active business. You've got a very positive outlook on life. You're obviously into fashion, and while it may have cost you your marriage, what you've shared with me is that you're in a new relationship. How have you been resilient? How have you kept your positive attitude through all this?
I'd be lying if I said it was easy. I mean, I'm one of those people who, I have a very strong fight in me. And part of the reason I think is because I know that my son can't fight for himself. I have to be the voice for him. And if I fall apart, there's no one to kind of pick up that torch and carry on. And so that's really been my driving force, is to stay strong for him. And to give him the best quality of not only life, but a mother that he can have. I always wanted him to see me as the mom who could have fun with him and play with him, and, would do anything for him. And I couldn't do that if I fell apart. And so that's always been my driving force, to keep going and to keep plugging forward no matter what.
But where does that driving force come from? Is it an example from your own parents, or from something you've read, or from religion, or what? Where does that, like, a lot of people would have given up?
I think if you asked my parents, I was born with that tenacity, they would call it. I've always been a very strong-willed person. Even as a small child, I would be the one in class when something was said that I didn't understand or agree with. I'd be putting my hand up and countering the teacher. I don't know. I've always just had that strong will. And it's served me well, especially in this circumstance, especially with my, my marriage falling apart and everything else, everything sort of snowballing in the last 2 years. it would have been very easy for me to, crawl up in a corner and just hide away from the world. But I felt strongly about, just you get knocked down, but never stay down. Keep getting back up and keep going.
Do you have a message for any parents that might have a severely autistic child?
I do. Never stop fighting. The one thing I've learned in this whole process is there are hoops of fire and hurdles that will get put in front of you left, right, and center. Never take it for what it is. There are ways to put out those fires and to knock those hurdles down. You just have to keep going, and don't ever take one opinion. Keep pressing for more. I don't want to use the adage of a squeaky wheel, but because sometimes, and I've heard this before, parents, you'll see protests of parents and things, and people say, I've heard this, crazy autism moms. I never wanted to be associated with that crazy autism mom, because I didn't want to be out there yelling and picketing and all of those things that, people sometimes associate with that. I wanted to be passionate, and I wanted to, have educated means to go forward with the things that I was trying to pursue for my son. And so, if I can give any parents any advice, it's, educate yourself, get more resources than you think you need. I mean, my son now has a team of about 20 professionals that oversee him, between psychologists, psychiatrists, support workers, children's agencies. We have a gamut of people that look after him. So it's a large team, and it's something I've had to fight and pursue to sort of get involved. But I highly recommend it for anybody who is struggling to deal with that kind of thing, to just keep going. And also, make time to have self-care. I know it's so important. And we say this even with the pandemic and everything else, self-care is so important. And that's just, even if it's 15 minutes to, lock yourself in the bathroom, have a bath, have something, just a few minutes. You need that for yourself to keep your strength up and keep going.
Vanessa Shelley, thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us the story of your son and your own story. And we wish you, and we really wish your son, what's his name, by the way?
It's Atreyu.
Atreyu.
From the Never Ending Story.
What a wonderful name.
Yeah.
We wish Atreyu the best, and hope that this new home that he's in works out really well for him, and for you as well. Thank you for joining us and sharing with us your story.
Thanks so much, Brian.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks so much for joining us. I think that one of the big lessons learned from Vanessa's story is unquestionably her resilience. There's no question, and her tenacity. But it's that we need more government funding for autism. 15-year wait, and that the fact that she's been put in a situation where she either has to fund $560 a day or go and get funding for the other ways that she's been able to get that funding. And we've heard lots of news stories about lack of funding for autism. And, we hear these stories, and unless we hear the personal story from someone like Vanessa, we don't understand how critically important it is. But to have a psychiatric hospital ward doctor say you cannot take your son home because he's too violent, or a care worker quit because that care worker thinks that that the son might kill you. How can anyone imagine that? And this is something that we should be funding. And how could you possibly wait 15 years? Like, how could you possibly wait 15 months? How could you possibly wait even 15 days? So we hope that this story and Vanessa's story and lots of other stories like this will motivate our government to provide a lot more funding for autism. It's something that obviously is a need that our society has. That's our show for tonight. Thanks for joining us. Good night, everybody.
Are you a philanthropist and believe in giving to better the world? Did you know donating stocks or mutual funds can save you more in taxes than donating cash? Do good by doing good. Call and let me show you how.